are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, all so that we can distill lessons from them that we then apply to our businesses and professional practices. So, as a military veteran and someone who benefited from the support of my fellow citizens, this is a way for me to give back to you for the kind of support you gave me and my colleagues versus what, frankly, people experienced back when I was a kid during the Vietnam War. So this is my thank you. So today, the show is called Small. I lost the title. Oops. Small Objective Strategic Breakthrough, right? And we're going to be talking about the Battle of Cantigny. It was the first battle in which the United States engaged in combat during World War I. And I'm going to, as I typically do on the show, first I'm going to give you some history of the battle so that we can then translate that into into lessons for us to use. And before I do, I just want to mention that Business Lessons from the Military is sponsored by the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. And I'll talk more about our sponsor about halfway through the show. Okay, so the Battle of Cantigny. So the United States, World War I started in 1914. It quickly boiled down to trench warfare. And anyone who's familiar with World War I knows about that. You had the trenches for the Allies and the they weren't called the Axis in World War I. Germany and her allies had a different name, but in any event, and then there was sort of no man's land between them, filled with barbed wire and minefields, and it was a horrible, bloody war. So the United States did not enter the war until April of 1917. The American Expeditionary Force was led by General John Pershing, the best known military man of his day in the United States, certainly. And though the Americans got to Europe in April of 1917, they spent over a year training before Pershing thought that they were ready for combat. And so comes May of 1918, and the Pershing felt the American troops were ready, and so he was looking for an objective that the U.S. troops could take on, and so at that time, it was really just a stalemate on the Western Front. Um, not long before the Battle of Cantigny takes place, Russia, Russia had gone through its revolution. It was now controlled by the Soviets. It was now communist Russia, essentially. They had withdrawn from the war. And so Germany no longer had to fight a two-front war. They were able to take troops from the Eastern Front and start moving them toward the Western Front. And they were getting ready to launch their spring offensive. And so, Pershing, looking for an objective in consultation with the French and the British, decided on the village of Cantigny, which is about 75 miles north of Paris. And it was going to be an American-led attack. However, there was going to be French support. I'll talk about that in a minute. So Cantigny sat on a small rise. It was held by the Germans, and it was a valuable observation point because it was on higher ground, so the Germans could see the surrounding countryside. Um, Capturing it would not only remove a tactical threat, but it would provide a morale boost for the American forces, proving to them their fighting ability. So the forces were aligned as follows. So on the U.S. side was the American 1st Division, known as the Big Red One, and it had about 4,000 infantrymen in the main assault. They were supported by French Schneider tanks, French artillery, and French flamethrower teams and engineers, as well as coordinated air reconnaissance. And so you can see the French provided quite a bit of support. On the German side were elements of the 18th Army. The number of Germans involved is not as clear as it is for the Allies and the American side. It's thought maybe around 1,500 to 2,000 Germans were defending Cantigny at the beginning of the battle. But as I'll talk about in a minute, there were numerous counterattacks, and so it's estimated that maybe by the time the battle was over, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 Germans took part. And the Germans, aside from having a fortified defensive position in Cantigny, they had heavy artillery, machine guns, they had a whole trench system built up, all of the vestiges that are so well known in World War I. So the battle began on May 28th, 1918. So you can see a little over a year after the Americans had gotten to Europe. The Americans launched a very carefully planned assault, coordinated with French artillery and armored support. The French had launched a preliminary artillery barrage, which was to become, really was already, but certainly became instrumental in offensives because it softened up the German defenses, or the defenses of the group that you were attacking. That artillery barrage was launched just before dawn. Again, that was pretty common in World War I. The assault was launched at 6:45 a.m. So getting up early. It reminds me of the famous Berlin song from World War I. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning, right? That song is associated with World War II, but it was actually written for World War I. And a lot of people don't know this. It was originally written for a Broadway show called Yip Yip Yappank. So it carried over into World War II. So the American infantry moved behind the rolling artillery barrage, and that kind of gave them protection and momentum. And despite intense machine gun fire, the Americans captured Cantigny within just a few hours. So, and then the French engineers followed in behind them. They immediately began fortifying the American positions in the village because they expected German counterattacks. And indeed, over the next 72 hours, the next 3 days, the Germans launched 7 major counterattacks supported by artillery and poison gas. So again, if you're familiar at all with World War I, the mustard gas was used, other types of poisonous gases. Soldiers generally carried a gas mask with them at all times to prevent getting killed by the gas. Okay, and despite these numerous counterattacks, the Americans held firm They did suffer significant casualties, but they retained control of Cantigny. And so it was, in fact, a resounding American victory in their first battle test in World War I. So what were the casualties? Well, approximately 1,067 casualties on the American side, 199 killed. The remaining were wounded or missing. On the German side, it's estimated that there were between 1,400 and 1,600 killed, wounded, or captured. Again, the numbers on the Germans are not as clear as on the American side. And so you can see, while the estimates are 1,500 to 2,000 German defenders of Cantigny originally, if that were the case, they would have been virtually wiped out. So I think that's why we get to numbers of about 3,000 to 4,000, because the German forces there were not wiped out. They were just substantially beaten. So why is Cantigny so important? Well, aside from it being the first engagement in combat of American troops, and being a small engagement by World War I standards, it really did have outsized importance. Well, first of all, it was the first major U.S. offensive success, right? And that boosted U.S. morale considerably. It proved that American forces were disciplined, they were effective, they could withstand intense pressure. There was a lot of skepticism among the French and the British toward American troops. Both the French and the British had been pressuring Pershing during the preceding year that American troops were in Europe to embed them in their own forces, to essentially make them replacements for the French and British forces. Pershing, for his part, was adamant that the American troops were going to fight as their own units. They were not going to become, sort of parts of the British and French forces. And in the event, Pershing, proved his point by the Americans fighting such a disciplined, effective offensive, carrying it off. With the French support, they were able to coordinate well and really prove their mettle. So I mentioned that it was a big boost to American morale, but it was also a boost to French morale. The French had borne the brunt the longest. The British got there not long after World War I began, but the Germans originally attacked the French, and then the British came to the continent in support of the French. But in the beginning, the British were not particularly effective. French morale was suffering. There were even mutinies. And so being a part of the American victory, seeing that the American troops could fight on their own and be victorious, that was a boost to French morale as well. And then, as I mentioned already a couple of times, the U.S.-French cooperation was significant. And when you take into account, the average American knew no French, except for perhaps, some salacious terms that they might use to get with women. The officers, for example, George Patton was I want to say he was lieutenant colonel in World War I. He spoke French, so some of the U.S. officers spoke French, but not all of them by any means, and not necessarily was that French. Was it fluent French? And so the fact that the French and the Americans could work together so well, proved to be important. Okay, so what do we learn from Cantigny in terms of lessons to apply to the business world? Well, first of all, start small but strategically. Okay, so the United States, they did not enter into a massive offensive right away. Instead, they chose a limited but meaningful engagement so that they could test their readiness, they could test their effectiveness, and they could build credibility. And this was important. If the US had tried to mount some major offensive and lost, so the pressure probably would have been impossible for Pershing to resist, to then embed the American forces with among the British and French forces. And so quite uh, intelligently, Pershing chose a limited engagement, a limited offensive to prove American mettle, and then build from there. And by the way, we saw the same thing in World War II. So the first American offensive in Europe in World War II was Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. And the U.S. actually invaded Morocco and kind of around that area, and then moved from there. And that was smart for the United States to have tried to invade mainland Europe right off the bat could easily have led to disaster, right? And so it was actually Churchill's idea to sort of vet American troops in a more limited battlefield, the more limited battlefield of North Africa. Stalin was pressuring for an American invasion of continental Europe. Okay, now, so the translation to the business environment is, so when you're entering a new market, launching a new product, okay, begin with a focused, manageable initiative, okay, so that you can get proof of concept and you can earn the trust of your customers, your team members, the other people with which you're dealing. You may have a marketing firm or a public relations firm involved. That's an outside firm but part of your team, right? You can earn the trust of all the different components before going broadly, right? So oftentimes that is the best way to go, especially if you're a smaller company, right? So to go wide initially, if you suffer a setback or you're not successful, could put you out of the game. So a limited but successful launch will oftentimes be much better, even for the long run, than trying to go wide initially. And oftentimes the temptation is to say, well, once we launch, competitors are going to come in and they'll overwhelm us. Yes, that is a risk, okay, depending on what it is you're launching. Okay, but if you launch and you have a follow-up plan for expanding after launch already set up, even if you have to make modifications to it, if your launch is successful, you will have the momentum. Okay. And so the key then will be keeping the momentum, and you can still stay ahead of your competition. Okay. So start small, but strategically. Next, preparation and training pay off. So despite, again, tremendous pressure on Pershing for the Americans to get involved, or sorry, for the American troops to be embedded with French and British troops, and to reduce the training time that it would take to get them into combat. Pershing was adamant that an appropriate amount of time be taken to train American soldiers and Marines so that they could be combat ready. And that paid off in spades, right? Because even in a small but very hot battle with 7 counterattacks, okay, the Americans emerged victorious. And it was in large part this training, and Pershing had his officers engage instructors from both the French and the British, so Americans would be able to take advantage of the numerous lessons that the French and British had um, had accumulated over the previous three to 4 years of war already, that the American troops were able to take advantage of that by having British and French trainers. Okay, so in business, right, translated in business, we need to invest in training. We need to be training our team and building a solid infrastructure. Now, training is the byword of the American military. And in many cases, especially in today's military, more time is spent training than in actual combat. That's one of the reasons why American forces tend to be so successful in actual combat. It's because we train. And the saying is, train like you fight. Okay. So in business, we need to train like it's the real thing in business. So we need to, if we're dealing with our marketing people, they need to train to real marketing objectives. Our production people, same thing. Okay, no matter what a member of our team is doing, that person needs the proper training to be able to effectively execute his part of obtaining the objective. And the fact of the matter is, a prepared and highly trained team will handle pressure better and will be able to deal with setbacks more effectively, right? I've talked about this numerous times on the show, right? You have to have a plan, but no plan, as von Moltke said, survives first contact with the enemy. So whatever plan we have, our team needs to be prepared to improvise. So a highly trained team is going to be more effective in improvising than one that doesn't have the proper training. Okay, so those go hand in glove. The ability to maneuver, to handle setbacks, all comes back to training. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here for just a moment and tell you about our sponsor, which is the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. I'm the president of the Beverly Hills Council. So the Navy League of the United States is an organization bringing together civilians and people in the military and military veterans in support of the sea services. The sea services are the United States Marine Corps, the United States Navy, the United States Coast Guard, and the United States Merchant Marine, all seaborne services, right? And the Navy League has a three-pronged mission, and that is support, educate, and advocate. So support the sea services, educate the public about what the sea services do, and advocate on behalf of the sea services so that they can do their job more effectively. One of the programs that the Navy League started back in 1952, I believe it is the Sea Cadets program, which allows teenagers, preteens and teenagers, to learn about the sea services and to participate in trainings and events to show them what the sea services are all about. And in fact, I met last week the incoming commanding officer of the Ronald Reagan unit of the Sea Cadets here in Los Angeles. His name is Chris, and Chris was telling me that his daughter, who is, I think he said 15, got to go to Florida, where she participated in a nine-day field medical training, and she came back just incredibly enthusiastic about what she learned and the confidence that she gained in being given this very thorough training. So the Sea Cadets is just one of the programs that the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States supports, and we're very happy and proud to be working with Chris and his group as they build themselves back up. And so, if you are interested in more information about the Navy League, please go to navyleague.org on the internet. And if you're interested in joining us and helping us with our work, A basic membership costs only $40 a year. And when you sign up, please, if you're in the greater Los Angeles area, please designate the Beverly Hills Council as your home council. So once again, the Beverly Hills Council of the United States Navy League, support, educate, and advocate. Okay, so now going back to business lessons from the military, our topic, small objectives, strategic breakthrough. I've been talking about the Battle of Cantigny and what lessons we can learn from this first time that American troops were involved in an offensive in World War I. So I talked before the sponsor break, I talked about start small but strategically, okay? And then preparation and training pays off. Now, the third lesson is leverage strategic partnerships. So the US troops worked very closely, as I mentioned, with French forces, including armor, which is tanks, and artillery and engineers. And they really benefited from the experience that the French had gained over the previous 4 years. Okay, and it really was a partnership in the truest sense of the word. So although it was the U.S. infantry that really took the brunt of the battle because they were the ones that attacked and captured the village and then held it against counterattack. They couldn't have done it without the French artillery and armor support, and so it worked out brilliantly from that standpoint. So in the business world, right? We need to look for strategic alliances, okay, and especially with experienced players who can provide us with critical support and insight when we're entering unfamiliar territory. So I know I look to do that as often as I can in my business, and in fact, my shows that you see, each weekday. I have as a mentor my friend Bill Gross, who has been doing this longer than me. He's had more success than I have, and so we have a strategic partnership whereby he mentors me as I grow my shows. But then I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was a guest on his show, and surprisingly, that show got over 700 views. Right. So we work together on a number of professional initiatives, and we leverage our knowledge. So I have a certain a certain body of knowledge, and Bill does. They're not the same, and so we can cross pollinate. Now we're both, small, so-called solo entrepreneurs, small businessmen. But even in medium size and large companies, strategic partnerships are always a good practice. It's always good to look for them. It's not necessary these days to build every capability in-house. And indeed, it probably is a mistake to do so. It creates a great deal of overhead and a great deal less flexibility, as opposed to teaming up with other companies or other organizations and taking advantage of the expertise they have to build your business, while the businesses you're partnering with can also build their own up by having you as a client. Okay, so especially when you're entering unfamiliar territory, look to team up with partners who have some experience in these areas, and that can increase the likelihood that you will be successful. Okay, so number 3, leverage strategic partnerships. Number 4, leadership and morale matters. So the first division, the big red one, as I mentioned, their nickname, was led by General Bullard, and his leadership really helped instill confidence in the American troops. The success at Cantigny really raised morale across the American forces. The Big Red One, of course, was not the only division in Europe at the time. The famous Rainbow Division was there, and several others, right? And so, but Bullard was a particularly good division commander, and so his leadership made a big difference in the success of the Big Red One's offensive. And by the way, Pershing too was an extraordinarily capable leader, and so his overall leadership of the entire American Expeditionary Force also had a tremendously positive impact on not just the First Division, but of course all of the American forces in Europe. Okay, so in business, effective leadership inspires teams, especially in high stakes situations. So the although the battle was short, the Battle of Cantigny was short. It was bloody. Okay, in essentially 3 days. There were almost 1,100 American casualties. Now, for a force that had really not been in significant combat before, to lose over 25% of your forces in 3 days could have been devastating. But the leadership was such that the troops knew what to expect, and indeed, out of the 4,000 troops, only 199 were killed. Right, so we're talking about 5%. Now, by today's standards, that would be very high, but by World War I standards, that was not. And so, out of the approximately 1,100 casualties, only about a fifth were deaths. And again, that was good when you consider they faced entrenched positions, they faced machine guns, they faced artillery, they faced poison gas, right? The losses were actually very low. Okay, so in business, we need to be aware of the impact of leadership. We need to prepare our teams beforehand for what they may face. It's all good and well to rah, 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 but we also need to prepare them for what the struggles may be, for potential setbacks. We don't want to convince them that this is going to be a walk in the park, launching this business initiative. Maybe we're launching a new product. Okay, it's never a walk in the park, so we have to prepare them for the struggle so that they will be able to endure that struggle and come out winning, if at all possible. Okay, that is a function of leadership. One might say it is the most important function of leadership, is setting expectations and then creating an atmosphere where our team members are convinced that they can meet the expectations and they can be victorious in achieving the objective. Okay, they have the training, they have the tools, they have the resilience, and so even though we're almost for sure going to meet hurdles, we're going to figure out a way around those hurdles. We're going to be resilient, we're going to be creative, and we're going to get there. That is a leadership function, and if we need to have that in the business world. Okay, so leadership and morale matter. That's point number 4. Point number 5, resilience against counterattacks. So, as I mentioned when I was talking about the battle itself, while the Americans captured Cantigny in just a few hours, with French help, they immediately started preparing for counterattacks that they knew were going to come. And over the next 72 hours, 3 days, the Germans counterattacked in force 7 times. Okay, imagine that, 7 times. So about, on average, every 10 hours, the Germans launched a major counterattack. Okay, that would have been devastating, except that the Americans and the French had anticipated that was going to be the case, and they prepared for it. And so they were able to be resilient in the face of these onslaughts. Okay. And by the way, I said one was launched every 10 hours, but that doesn't mean there was 10 hours between them, right? Because the counterattack had to be launched. They lasted for various periods of time. But in between the counterattacks, right, the Americans and the French, they had to replace their supplies of ammunition. They needed to rest. They needed to eat. They needed to sleep, right? And so all of that, making sure all of those needs were taken care of, played into the resilience that the Americans and French were able to exhibit. Okay, so in the business world, once we gain an edge, whether it's getting a new client, launching a new product, launching some new innovation, okay, we need to expect competitive pushback, okay? Even if we're launching something that's new, okay, the pace of business is so rapid these days that other companies are going to quickly uh, glom on to what we're doing, especially if it's successful, and they're going to launch their own initiatives. They're going to launch counterattacks against us, and they're going to try to knock us out of the way, overtake us in success. Okay, so what we need to do, as I mentioned earlier, is we need to maintain our competitive advantage by preparing our team for the inevitable counterattacks that are going to come from other businesses, other organizations, etc. Okay, so we have to prepare for the short-term burst of energy to launch it, but we also have to prepare for the long term so that we can maintain our competitive position against other companies, etc., coming into the field and trying to push us out. Okay, so again, resilience against counterattacks is crucial. Finally, and this is the sixth point and final point that I'm going to make. Symbolism matters. Okay. So, though it was a small victory, especially given the scale of the battles that were happening in World War I, where sometimes there could be 1 million troops involved in total, both sides, in especially in some of the battles in 1918. Cantigny was a relatively small battle, somewhere between 7,000-8,000 troops altogether. It was tiny in a way, right? But it loomed much larger symbolically because it signified that America had arrived as a legitimate, serious player in the combat that was going on. And it showed both our allies, primarily the British and French, that we could attain victory as well as they could, which was a big morale boost to them. But it also showed the Germans that despite being relieved by having to fight a two-front war, they had a new competitor in the United States, and a competitor with a tremendous amount of industrial might behind it, a tremendous amount of manpower behind it, and one that was prepared and could fight and win. And so the symbolism of the victory by American and French forces at Cantigny was not lost on either side. The Entente. I've been trying to think of the word for the Germans and their allies. So we had the Allies, America, United States, France, and Great Britain, and the Entente, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and other countries. Okay, so both the Allies and the Entente saw the symbolism behind this small victory on the part of the United States troops at Cantigny. So, in business, okay, the perception of strength or confidence oftentimes can open more doors than just raw numbers. So, one can have a huge company, but the fact that they have lots of people and lots of resources doesn't necessarily mean that they can be effective. So, a smaller company that can prove itself in the marketplace will have a competitive advantage because although they may have relatively smaller victories, because they've shown customers, clients, and competitors that they can enter a market and achieve an objective. They can enter and win. So they may be the most formidable competitor, even though they're not the largest. Okay, or the competitor that's been in the marketplace the longest. Okay, they can be the new kid on the block, right? But they can still be the one that is going to that's going to be the go-to company for whatever service or product that they provide. Okay, so symbolism matters, and when we have a victory, we want to tastefully, I would argue, um, publicize that victory, communicate it effectively so that people can understand our true value as a company. Okay. So there's so much blather out there about this and that. When we have an actual reason to tout our success, we should do so. Okay. We should do so credibly, honestly. Okay. So that people can see who we truly are. Okay, so symbolism matters. So, real quickly, reviewing the lessons we can learn from the U.S. victory at Cantigny. Start small but strategically. Preparation and training pay off. Leverage strategic partnerships. Leadership and morale matter. Res- have resilience against counterattacks. And finally, symbolism matters. So, those are the business takeaways from this first U.S. offensive in World War I in May of 1918. It's interesting to note that World War I ended with the armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th month, November, on the 11th day of the month in 1918, less than 6 months after the Battle of Cantigny, right? So the effectiveness of the American troops turned the tide. The war had been going on for 4 years before Cantigny. It ended 6 months later, and it shows you the true impact of this small but highly consequential victory. And we can do the same thing in our businesses and professional practices if we learn and adapt, I should say, these lessons. So I thank you very much for joining me today, and especially my live viewers. Always great to have you on out there in the viewing sphere, I guess we call it. Tomorrow at 10 p.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And I'm going to be talking about business continuity during a personal crisis. The fact of the matter is, life does not go smoothly. So what are we going to do if we're running a business and suddenly we have a crisis in our personal life, health crisis, relationship crisis, etc.? So we're going to talk about it tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, Wednesday, on People Making Money. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. And then 1 week from today, I'll be back with the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So I thank you again very much for joining me. Wish you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do. Oh, one last note with thanks to our sponsor, the Beverly Hills Council of the U.S. Navy League. Signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my